let's talk about what happened on episode 29 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role. And if you're not familiar with our recaps, maybe you're checking out the episode for the first time. What we like to do is we like to do a very brief recap, as brief as we can, for 4 hours plus of content. And then what we do is we take that recap and we cut it out, put it at its own video, so that if you're just trying to catch up, you can check that video out. If you're on that video and you want to hear our general thoughts, reactions, theories, or you want to contribute your own thoughts and theories, click on the link below to get our full discussion and let us know in the comments, not just what you thought of the episode, but also some of the crazy insights that you might have for the show. So having said that, episode 29 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role, I'm going to do my best to recap this well. There was so much lore in this episode. This was definitely probably one of the heaviest episodes in terms of lore.
Yep.
So I do have some notes up. Will definitely feel free to jump in if I miss something. Only because the episode moved very quickly in terms of there was a lot of breadcrumbs of details as well.
Yeah.
So episodes opens up with where we left off. There's Birdie and Fern being grabbed by what we come to find out is you. It's a changeling from the Feywild. And they go by you, like why you? And Birdie's like, you let him right towards us. And immediately it's sort of like this Mexican standoff type moment of like, who's going to act first? Like what's going to happen? And there's really just a little bit of chatter. Yu's immediately casting shade on Birdie, being like, you can't trust her. She's lied to you. Like really trying to turn Fern even against Birdie. And Birdie is saying really the same thing back. Like, this person's here to kill me. They're from the Unseelie Court. Like, you can't trust them. And then also, like, in general, people are kind of like, okay, we don't like that Yu's been lying to us, but we also don't know what's going on with Birdie. And in kind of like the craziness of what's happening here, there is a moment that I'll go ahead and mention. And actually, there's going to be combat that happens in this episode. But Imogen actually does cast Detect Thoughts on Birdie and gets a whisper from Matt. And that immediately leads to her being knowledgeable and insightful on Birdie knows Ira, the Nightmare King. And so there's some, you would think that the group would just be like, oh, use the baddie, let's help Birdie. But actually the party's definitely torn. So there's, accusations getting thrown. People are asking Birdie for an explanation, like what's going on. Birdie actually reveals that Fern, we thought it was Imogen this whole time. It might still be. Birdie reveals that Fern is Ruidus born, that, years ago was born under the red surging moon. And that also for about 7 years now, the Feywild, which you could only ever see Katha in the Feywild, that the red moonlight of Ruidus has been shining through and has really unsettled the Callaways. In fact, it's caused the Callaways to really have these bad omens of something that is to come. And it's actually also what caused them to leave the Feywild. I don't want to steal any like the greater descriptions of the second half that she explains, Will. But basically, long story short, they stole the Moontide crown from the Unseelie Court, and they've been on the run for the last 6 years. There's also a revelation that it actually has been as many years as Fern thought it has happened, in the sense of like for her it has been 90 years versus the 6 for Birdie. Both of those seem to be true. And there's this weird realization that Birdie's actually younger than Fern. Birdie's only 50 years old. I think Fern is 112 maybe, or something to that regard. So that's a really weird, like, wait a second, I'm older than you kind of moment.
Yeah.
All this to say, combat begins. Birdie actually tries to go invisible, but Yu successfully holds on to Birdie. Birdie will slip by, but Ashton and maybe FCG, they bar the doors to keep Birdie from leaving. They're like, we're going to figure this out and talk this through. And there's some blows that are had. Fern attacks Yu. Orem actually disarms Yu at one point and then holds Yu's blade against them. Mister gets summoned. There's all sorts of like random attacks that happen. And all this to say, the party is basically trying to actually de-escalate and talk this through. There's even a point where Imogen just flatly announces or asks Birdie, "Hey, how do you know the Nightmare King?" And Birdie's like, "Oh, and it's kind of like this moment of like, oh, well, he's just helping us out, like he's helping us build something." And then I think it's either Ashton or Imogen says like, "Well, he's sacrificing children, right?" And they're like, "Ooh, yeah, I didn't know that, but hey, he was probably doing work for someone else. Like we've all been like, trying to get cash together for this project that we're building." And all this to say, Imogen really pleads with Birdie to put down her sword and says like, "Hey, you're the only one who's like really looking bad here," which you would think it would have been you, but they do have a ceasefire. They decide to talk it through. Birdie reveals something that we've been wondering, and that is that in a month's time is an apogee solstice, which there's a solstice that happens, but then there's like the best way to think of it is like sort of like a mega solstice that happens only once every 100 and something years,
like 120, I think, something like that.
120 years. Well, it's happening in 1 month's time, which if you've seen Calamity, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And they are really trying to finish building whatever they're building soon enough before the solstice happens. You sort of accusingly says like they're trying to like maybe blow up the moon. All this to say, Fern actually pickpockets you and gets this corrupted mirror of some kind. And Yu's basically like, "Hey, don't point that at anyone or it's going to be bad news." And Yu also says like, "Hey, you're also going to have a lot of other assassins coming after you, just FYI." Cheney basically says, "Well, if you give us a month's time just to sort all this out, to figure all this out, we'll hand the Moontide Crown back over to you." And Yu's pretty much like, "Okay, deal. Like I will kind of continue to pass along breadcrumbs of information to my boss and sort of stall, but in a month's time, I'm coming back for the crown, and you better have it ready for me." So, were there other details that I mentioned from this first half? There was a lot.
There was a lot. I think you hit the main strides, for the purposes of this recap. But it was kind of a lot happening, and a lot of it boiled down to like getting to the ceasefire moment, But yeah, I think you did good.
Right. There are also some other cool flavor moments of you like turning into different characters of the party. You actually turns themselves into what they describe as a hot half elf and try to convince Orem to like put down his sword. And Orem's like, "Hard pass."
He's not amused by it.
Yeah, you actually turns into Imogen at one point when Laudna strikes you and is like, "Why would you hurt me?" So a lot of kind of cool flavor moments like that. And then also Birdie does mention that they're meeting up with someone, a goblin in Bassaros, known by Hondir,
yeah.
And basically once everything's settled and you moves on, Birdie basically says, "Yeah, all right, let's go meet my friend Hondir." So that's for the most part what happened in the first half. I apologize if I missed a key detail, only because there was so much. But yeah,
I don't think you did.
Okay, cool. Well, let's hand it off to Will. You can cover the second half, which has even more crazy stuff.
Yeah, so again, forgive me, a whole bunch of lore here. I'm going to try to be brief, but you know how it goes sometimes. So we pick back up, and Birdie is leading the party to Hondir. And we find out that Hondir is laying low because he recently got into it with some people and, basically very on edge and secretive. So they make their way to like this storm cistern, and Birdie notices like a mark that denotes like, okay, we're in the right spot. And they head to a nearby shed and then to a trap door inside, inside said shed. After reassuring Hondir that all the footsteps he can clearly hear, because usually it's just Birdie that comes to visit him. So he's like on edge. He's like, "I can hear there's a ton of people with you. Like, what's going on?"
Right.
But she reassures him, and basically everyone goes inside, but not before Hondir mentions like, "Hey, I have this whole place rigged to explode. So any funny business and we're all going to die." So they're like, "Okay." They make their way down, and this basement is kind of like this little sanctuary. It's stocked with books and food, but also explosives and crossbows rigged like up with ropes pointed at the doorway. Like this guy's definitely, on edge. Um, so they get down to business, get to talking, and basically we break down with Hondir and Birdie basically explaining what they've been up to. Um, Big lore dumps here. Again, trying to be brief, but it's revealed to the party that there are these things called ley lines and nexus points. Basically, these like ley lines of magical energy across the planet, across Exandria. And with these ley lines, you can do very powerful magic, like doors can open to other realms, rituals are more potent, et cetera, et cetera. And if you've seen Calamity, you kind of have a gist of this already.
Yeah, like we know.
Yeah. But he reveals that historically, these ley lines can be rewritten during celestial solstices, and they've been rewritten many times during Exandria's history. And like Blake mentioned, he reveals that the next solstice, this apogee solstice, is about a month away. And so what they've been working on is this device that they can use to hopefully tap into that energy. And this work they're doing puts them at odds with many people. Of course, we have the Unseelie Court, who is after the Callaways. But there's also just political powers and other powers that be that also want to utilize this energy, and so they are basically directly at odds with all of these parties. Hondir reveals that he studied at the EOS seminary, and his work there is what led him to believe that this next nexus of this ley line energy is going to be somewhere in the Hellcatch Valley. As they were researching this, they actually got like shut down. Like some parties that be wanted that research, nixed, and so the researchers had to continue in private. Around about this time, Orym asks about the Grim Verity, and Hondir reveals that he is in fact a member. Orym then tells him about the assassination of the attempted assassination of Keyleth at the Arashari and how those assassins came, and also brings up the Loomis twins and how they were assassinated. And Hondir, reveals that he knew the Loomis twins. They were more recent members of the Grim Verity, and their excitement basically drove them to do things they shouldn't have been doing. They left a trail that ultimately got them killed. And he knows that, or Hondir knows that these Grey assassins have been killing like a ton of the Grim Verity's members. I think he mentions maybe half of them have been assassinated by these people. But he does say that he doesn't think Keyleth is a member of the Grim Verity, so he's unsure of necessarily who these assassins are targeting. So even though half of the Verity has been eliminated, he's not sure of the assassin's ultimate plan here. So anyway, how did the Callaways get in on all of this? And Blake touched on this a little bit, but Birdie basically reveals that, on one of her and Ollie's excursions to Exandria, they gave birth to Fern in the verdant expanse under the light of Ruidus. But something weird happened. Like right when Fern was born, there was a Ruidus flare, as we've come to know them, where the brilliant light like filled the sky. This actually obviously caught their attention, so Ollie and Birdie started asking around about Ruidus, finding out about Ruidus-born people and these legends that kind of surround them. As they, were diving more and more into this, Ollie actually began to have some dreams of Ruidus, of the moon following them, and as Blake mentioned, it began to appear in the Fey realm, and Ollie would have these dreams of Ruidus basically destroying the Feywild and everything in its path. So, freaked out by this, they take this information to the Seelie Court, and they're basically just not taken seriously. So they have to continue investigating on their own, and they do find that indeed Ruidus has appeared in the Feywild when it normally does not, but it is concealed. It's not just visible from anywhere in the Feywild, it's only visible if you go into like the darker areas. And they come to find out that the Unseelie Court and some Exandrian people are kind of maybe intentionally hiding this, and they're working on some device surrounding all of this. So they talk to the Unseelie Court, and they are basically not taken seriously by them either. So what Birdie and Ollie decide to do is steal a piece of this device that they're working on, with the hopes being that it slows whatever they're trying to do down. And this piece that they stole is the Moontide Crown. And ever since they stole that, that's why they've been on the run. That's why Yu is after them. And now they are trying to build their own device with the help of Ira to ultimately try and hopefully find a way to do something about Ruidus. Um, Imogen asks, "Wait, so you saw the Unseelie Court people talking with I guess Exandrians is the best way to put it, but like not
Sure.
Feywild people."
Right.
And they come to find out that Odahan Thul was one of these people. And so, Imogen obviously kind of tells how she knows of her, and they're just trying to piece this together.
Right.
And Hondi reveals another a facet to all this as well, that the Grim Verity had actually discovered texts in Vasselheim, and they stole these texts that dated back to the founding, that had no mention of Ruidus, only Catha. So Ruidus was not always there. These texts also refer to two gods that do not exist, are not mentioned in the current pantheon. And so that's kind of weird. And again, these texts were stolen, so the Verity has angry people at them for that too. So basically Hondir and the Verity at large are basically getting it from all directions, and that's why he's being, so on edge and secretive. Hondir doesn't know who these two deities are. The information has been very kind of safeguarded. He also doesn't know who has the text right now, but he believes they're in Eos. Imogen then brings up how her mother was Ruidus born and asks if Hondir knew her, and he says he does in fact know Liliana, as she was part of their studies, the same study that Imogen originally was researching at the start of this campaign in that book that the Loomis twins checked out. And he describes how her mother was a special Ruidus born. Like, there are Ruidus borns, and then there are like special Ruidus borns, and he described how she had these powers similar to the same ones we know Imogen to have. Imogen reveals that she has these same powers, and Hondir basically says like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And they're like, "Why are you sorry?" And he's like, "Because this means you're definitely connected to everything that's happening and what's coming." So he basically views it as a very bad thing.
Right.
They then kind of the party discusses their ire for Ira, and like they're just like, "How could you work with this guy? He's a bad dude, he's probably going to turn on you." And Birdie's like, "We just didn't really have a choice. He was the only one that, like, one, believed us, and two, had like the knowledge and willingness to help." They then kind of talk about this time discrepancy of the 6 years and 90 years. And Birdie is like, "Yeah, I mean, Mori is like the lord of her domain, and it's definitely within her power to have kind of dilated the time that way. Many people know better than to walk into her domain." And so she believes that Mori had something to do with that. Then they're like, "Okay, well, what's next?" And they're like, "We should go to the Callaway hideout. We want to take a look at this machine you and Ira are building. So let's take the crawlers to get there a little bit faster." So boom, we need to head back to Joe's to see if our crawler is repaired. So they do that. Meanwhile, Birdie and Hondir are like gathering their things up because he's like, "I got to get out of here. It's too hot." Not hot as in like temperature, but like too many people are after him. So they decide to meet back at Tal'Dorei, Taste of Tal'Dorei, once they get the crawler back. They do that, kind of figure out who's going to ride with who, and then they set off. But then they quickly remember, "Oh crap, we forgot Hondir." So they turn around, go back and get Hondir, and then go back. And that's where the episode ends. Whew.
That was episode 29. What happened? Again, check out the link below if you're just on the recap. Lot to talk about, and check out our full discussion, and let us know your thoughts in the comments as well. So
yeah, please do. And a little cliffhanger for anyone watching this recap video: Blake, I actually got some juicy lore to share as well. So
you do?
That's where I'm going to cut off the recap, so make people, have a little cliffhanger. But yeah,
should have been a thumbnail of you going, "Who?" I mean, going,